So let's simply start now. So welcome to this very first lunch lecture in our lunch lecture series this academic year on ignorance and its relevance for science and society. If you go through philosophy and if you just look at important statements by famous scientists, you inevitably come across the link between knowledge and ignorance. We actually have a specialist for classics here with us, actually also Professor Gerke. So it's allegedly Socrates actually said, I know that I know nothing. Confucius' real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Copernicus, to know that we know what we know, and to know that we do not know what we do not know, that is true knowledge. And Isaac Newton, what we know is a drop, what we don't know is an ocean. So these are all statements that point to the fact that knowledge and ignorance are just two sides of the same coin. And with every step that increases our knowledge, our awareness is sharpened, how much we still do not know. So this is one starting point already. Another starting point that I just wanted to mention right at the beginning of this lecture, where I'm talking largely to a German audience, is one needs to be careful to distinguish between ignorance in English and ignorance here in German. This is why, with the German announcement of this lecture, we actually explicitly said Ignoranz, nicht wissen. Okay, so in German we actually observe a kind of semantic narrowing or specialization, because in German to ignore means both the conscious and unconscious refusal to take notice of or to acknowledge the existence of something or someone, more in the direction of not wanting to know. So in English, ignorance simply means passively being ignorant. It's a more neutral term, whereas in German, this is more actively ignoring. It's the more emotionally, politically loaded term, and some of you may know this Austro-Bavarian, gar nicht ignorieren, nicht einmal ignorieren darfst. So we actually have the double negation here that you have in the Austro-Bavarian dialects. And this neutrality of the German Nichtwissen is actually rather rendered than by English ignorance. What this semantic field of ignorance, Nichtwissen, non-knowledge exactly looks like, this is what Veronika Lipphardt will actually later on introduce us to. But when we talk about this German sense of ignorance, actively ignoring, then there is one slide that I wanted to chip in at this point, because we actually have also various kinds of discourses of public ignorance of science. I mean, very often we actually see the onus on science rather to transport what we are doing to the public, but one should actually also see that there is a kind of ignorance that is a deliberate choice. Nicely formulated by Michael, a rhetoric of intentional ignorance being mobilized to challenge or attack the relevance of a given body of expert knowledge to the real issue at stake as perceived by the speaker. So this often leads, in fact, to the devaluation or even ridiculing of experts and facts, and ignorance is almost considered a virtue. And at this point, I sometimes actually originally had in brackets Pegida and Trump, but actually, so I think this has not changed really in my perception, but I think it was partly what was going on in the United States, that we have actually this kind of ignorance and anti-establishment view that led to the results that we got. We actually have to see that there is also this kind of discourse in the public that people perhaps deliberately do not want to take notice of facts and expert knowledge. So when I actually looked at this topic and worked myself into this, I really came to the conclusion at some point that we cannot really afford to ignore ignorance. So this question really receives a clear no as an answer. And it is important, not just, if I just go back to this question, it is not only important to we understood as we academics and we scientists, but also we as a society. So I think that really dealing with ignorance is something that has great importance, not only to us once it comes to how we think about our own fields, but it also is very crucial actually in the way in which we interact with the public. So I think there are crucial outreach consequences that we also need to think of as scientists once we come to this issue of ignorance. And to explore this topic of ignorance at FRIAS is, I think, also something highly suitable, because what, let's say, our idea with regard to FRIAS is that we should always try to push the frontiers of science by exposing our fellow community to the most challenging questions, and questions that force all of us, not just the fellows inside FRIAS, but all of us to reflect upon our research and research field, including both their foundations and issues and topics not touched upon, or perhaps better not to be touched upon. And questions with the potential of reconnecting with, possibly calling into question the fellows and their relevant discipline self-understanding. And ideally such questions spark off discussions within and across disciplines, discussions within but also beyond the academic world, that is in society and the public sphere in general. And this is why I think ignorance is about the most challenging question that you can ask. What is it that in any given academic discipline is not known? How can one systematize different kinds and dimensions of ignorance? And which implications does reflecting on and admitting to ignorance have on the future research agendas and funding agendas on the one hand, and on society, the public, on the other? After all, in the public opinion, science and ignorance exclude each other, are almost contradictions in terms. We want to address all these issues in the course of this lecture, and as, not just today, but also through the whole term. But these are really three important things that Veronika and I want to address this morning. Making slowly my way to Veronika's part, and especially also to the fact that we have a group of EA students here with us who actually look at topics of ignorance and uncertainty from a more fine-grained point of view. One should actually say that, of course, ignorance and teaching, for example, go together very, very nicely, because this is, from the point of view of Socrates, for instance, even part of the dialectic method of teaching. So Socrates, as a teacher, said, "I know nothing," and so what I want to know about something, I need to learn from my students by dialogue. And I think all of us actually also in adopting or in planning our seminars and lectures, especially to beginning students, we actually practice something that I would call planful or deliberate ignorance. So we simply present the simple before the complex, the regularities before irregularities, and the neat ideal before the messy reality. And Ludwig Fleck, a science sociologist whom we will actually meet again later on this morning, actually also followed the idea that students get introduced to a thought collective or a thought style by narrowing down the range of questions they're encouraged to ask. So this is also by way of didactics, let's say, a link between ignorance and teaching. But now we would like to continue with the link between UCF and FRIAS, and Veronika, as the specialist in science studies, will also introduce you to recent concepts of ignorance.
Thank you very much. I have already said much from this slide, so I can skip it, I think, but we should mention Anne Harrington, a historian of science from Harvard, that we owe a lot of inspiration and encouragement. Okay, so to recent concepts of ignorance, and I should emphasize that that we speak about this against the backdrop of also many negative evaluations of ignorance in the sciences on the side of scientists and researchers themselves. It's not that all scientists and researchers embrace ignorance or an attitude that the SDS scholars I will talk about embrace. So I think it's necessary to remember that. There are different evaluations or attitudes to ignorance in science. We think it's not inherently negative or not necessarily negative. We have just seen that it can be very useful as a planful ignorance in teaching. It can be a survival strategy for academics. Ignorance can be a bliss. Ignorance can also be a means of self-protection and of staying focused, ignoring other things that would confuse you too much and distract you. And in the light of a flood of new publications and information reaching us via diverse sets of channels, we often have no choice but ignoring certain things. There are, however, explicit positive evaluations of ignorance in the sciences from a philosophical standpoint. I begin with Gross. In 2010, there's a whole book on surprise and ignorance. drawing on a long-standing tradition in philosophy and sociology, particularly Georg Simmel, who wrote about secrecy and the importance of non-knowledge in society in 1906 already. Voss says, surprises make you aware of the unknowns, and this actually is a major driving force of science. So without this looking for and searching for surprises that can teach us new things and that can show us what we have not known before, science wouldn't even work. This is even emphasized much stronger by Firestein in 2012, and Firestein is a neuroscientist himself with a lot of lab experience. He says science is not an unbroken record of advances and insights. That's very much what historians of science and SDI scholars also emphasize. So we have an ally here in the natural sciences and not only one. It is also not a brotherhood tied together by its golden rule, the scientific method. It's not facts and rules. He uses the metaphor of searching black cats in dark rooms, and the quote says, it's groping and probing and poking, and some bunking and bumbling, and then a switch is discovered, often by accident, and the light is lit, and everyone says, oh, wow, so that's how it looks. And then it's off into the next dark room, looking for the next mysterious black feline. So what we can see here is knowing that there are very many dark rooms that we have yet to explore is something that drives science. And that's what he also emphasizes. Voss has published a second book in 2015 together with McGoy, and he labeled it the Handbook of Ignorance Studies, he says that since about 2000 there's an emergence of a new dynamic field of research, and that's true. We couldn't even read all of the things that have been published ever since. And Voss and McGoy say, in the widest sense, it is a field exploring the social life and political issues involved in the distribution and strategic uses of not knowing. Ignorance needs to be understood and theorized as a regular feature of decision-making in general, in social interaction and in everyday communication. What is different in this book, or what, in contrast to the book from 2010, where he focused on science and ignorance in science, he expands his perspective here and says we are now not only looking at ignorance as something completely normal in science, but also at ignorance as something completely normal everywhere. They emphasize, as a basic approach, ignorance as irregular rather than deviant. Quite different is the approach of Robert Proctor, a historian of science, who coined the term agnotology. Agnotology, in his approach, is concerned with the production of ignorance, the purposeful production of ignorance, and thus operates very much at the boundary of ignorance to secrecy. He asks, is science possibly keeping the public and political decision makers ignorant of potential risks of, for example, new technologies, laws, or reforms? Who are the drivers behind this? Cui bono? Important questions concerning the sociology of science, the politics of science, and the relationship between science and society are being raised by Proctor and his colleagues. But this basic approach emphasizes that ignorance is something deviant. It's not something regular. It's something that we should fight against, that we should not be happy with, because they depict ignorance as something that is produced by political and economic powers who want to deceive us and who want to make people believe that there is less knowledge than there should be. And that means if one fights ignorance and these influences from these powers, then we should have more and more knowledge and get rid of that unpleasant ignorance. So there is a certain tension between these two approaches. It's also acknowledged in the literature. Whereas ignorance studies, as Voss pursues them, focuses on epistemology and sociology of science and views ignorance as something potentially positive, and desires that we develop strategies for dealing with ignorance in science and in society. Agnotology focuses on power structures, views ignorance as something bad, and only admits for certain exceptions that it also can be good, and suggests that we should be working against the production of ignorance. Here, as a further differentiation, Spuntovic and Rabitz view ignorance as the most far-reaching type or the deepest type of uncertainty. Here, in this classification, uncertainty is the umbrella term, And we have three different sorts, the inexactness, the unreliability, and ignorance. So inexactness would be inexact knowledge, unreliable knowledge, and then deep, true ignorance. This is maybe useful for discussing this house of the unknown. This is taken from Gross, 2010. And please keep in mind, he set up this house for the study of ignorance in science. This is in the 2010 book. So the different terms might not seem so obvious to you. I will try to explain them. Gross, and now actually I should emphasize, I owe my students a lot when it now comes to the discussion of this house. We have discussed it extensively and I've learned a lot from them. Thank you very much. So nescience up there is the unknown that we don't even know. We just don't know that there's something we don't know. Complete blank ignorance. As soon as you become aware of this unknown, it is called ignorance in this house. So ignorance is the unknown that you are aware of. This then quite quickly becomes distinguished in either negative knowledge, and Gross says this is knowledge that we don't want to pursue further, we find it irrelevant, or we can't pursue it because we will never know, so we put this aside and don't follow it. However, if we say, well, this unknown actually should be pursued, we should know more about it, and we come to plan it into our research agendas, then this is termed non-knowledge in Gross classification. As you can see, if you dig deeper into that non-knowledge, you could find out that there's even more that you don't know, right? More aspects that are unclear. And then, of course, what researchers try to do is turn non-knowledge in extended or new knowledge, so that we have some period knowledge. I would like to shortly give an example, the Zika virus, you have probably followed in the news. So for the international community of medical scientists, the Zika virus was actually never nescience, or it's long ago that it was nescience. For a long time it was negative knowledge, nobody wanted to pursue it. It was only prevalent in developing countries, not of any interest. So very few knowledge existed on the Zika virus. But when the Zika virus started spreading into industrialized countries, it suddenly became very interesting non-knowledge, right? Oh, we don't know enough about this, and particularly when Brazil, with the Olympic Games coming, was affected, researchers wanted to know a lot about Zika, and so they worked on that non-knowledge in order to turn it into extended or new knowledge. One aspect of Zika, which was clearly nescience at that time, completely unknown, was that it affected embryos in pregnant mothers. So that scientists could observe this was only possible because the cases, or there were increasing numbers of cases, and also because they paid more attention. If you pay more attention, you suddenly see things that you have not seen before, and so for a long time, scientists did not know whether this could be true knowledge or whether that was just some statistic error or something like that. So it was in the realm of non-knowledge that was very much on the agenda, and only recently turned extended or new knowledge. And now to bring in a little bit of that political emphasis that we owe to agnotology in Proctor's approach, the students pointed out to me that nescience, or that this house and the arrows here suggest that whole communities, or actually the whole of humanity, is in the same status. But that's obviously not always the truth, right? There are some people for whom Zika was non-knowledge, there were some people for whom Zika was negative knowledge, and there were some people for whom Zika was nescience, right? And of course, recommendations how to act upon non-knowledge or nescience or negative knowledge depend very much on your place here in this diagram. So you have maybe seen that the recommendations regarding Zika were pregnant women should better not travel to Brazil. And that was only a recommendation for a very small part of all affected women. So here, questions of power and of emphasis play into that house, and it's not just an epistemological thing. Okay, now I hand over to Bernd.
mentioned at the beginning that what actually fascinates me about this topic most is that it also helps us as scientists to reflect upon our own work and also upon our research agendas, upon paradigms that or theoretical frameworks, research traditions that we happen to be working in. And in this case, therefore, when actually thinking about ignorance, I found it quite instructive actually to read something about the work of the science sociologist Ludwig Fleck from the 1930s, where he actually identified 4 types of instantiations of what he called Beharrungstendenz of established knowledge systems, so persistency tendency. And I think this is something that is really important if you somehow try to think about your own approach, and if you somehow perhaps also develop some critical questions with regard to the work that each of us is doing within their own framework. Because if we look at these established knowledge systems, and the question is what actually happens if we come across facts or findings that do not really fit this established knowledge system, okay? So, and he said there are 4 types of things that can happen. On the one hand, number 1, contradicting the system appears, in the first case, imponderable, okay? It's even something that is a non-thought. Secondly, what does not fit into the system remains unnoticed. Or thirdly, it will not be spelled out, even if it is known. Or fourthly, what does not fit into the system will, with great effort, be explained in a way that does not contradict the system. Okay? The result is that we are aiming for system internal harmony, which really is no more than a harmony of deceptions out of which there is no way of escaping. A possible way out of this, as Fleck, for instance, sees it, may be an inter- or transdisciplinary approach, because this may actually make an important contribution to revealing theory and discipline-specific ignorance. And for Thomas Kuhn, for example, the possible way out was that at some point there may be so many inner conflicts within such a knowledge system that what is called for is a paradigm shift. Okay. Briefly, I wanted to say a few words, but we will actually sort of go on only for 5 more minutes because we want to have some room for discussion. I would just say just a few things on the relationship between ignorance decision-making and the public on the one hand, and also science politics on the other hand. I think the most important, one of the most important points that was nicely formulated and also in a report by the European Environment Agency a few years ago was that once it comes to the discourse between science and the public, there are certain mistakes that scientists should not make. And one way of avoiding such a mistake is to do what is actually advised here. Acknowledge and respond to ignorance as well as uncertainty and risk in technology appraisal and public policy making. So do not hide it somewhere, right? What in the long run undermines the public authority of science and scientific expertise and experts most is the marginalization of ignorance and displaying the air of false scientific certainty. So bring it out in the open. This is the basic message here. This is why I actually also think that this kind of topic is crucial whenever we think about social